Good afternoon. Good afternoon. How is everyone doing today?
Good afternoon, sir. Fine, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. Always lovely to get to see your smiling faces.
Wait, sir, question before you start.
Yes, what's up?
This is not my original tutorial.
Okay.
Do we have to go to our original tutorials? Because I find it like this one better since it had to come last week since you canceled Thursdays.
Um, the answer is that I really do try and maintain you guys in the tutorials that you're enrolled in. Um, my stance is that with few exceptions, my policy is that you're welcome to attend tutorials that you are not enrolled in, but you're not really, like, this is not the place that you're supposed to be participating. So you do also need to be attending the tutorial that you're enrolled in. So does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
No problem. Um, okay. So how are we doing?
Hi, sir. We're fine.
Great. Awesome.
Good
Wonderful.
afternoon,
Okay.
sir.
I'm sorry. Oh, were you just saying that you're doing fine? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So we're going to start like we normally start. I want to check in and make sure that you guys understood last week's lectures. So just sort of walk me through very briefly what we talked about last week. And then this is also your opportunity if there's anything from last week that wasn't clear to you that you don't feel like you have a grip on, this is your chance to ask questions about it. So I don't mind waiting for you guys because silence is usually the sound of thinking.
Sir, I
Go
don't
ahead.
have anything to ask.
Okay, well, that's fine. It's totally fine. But remember, there were two pieces to this, right? There was, do you have any questions? But then I ask a question as well, right? The question is, what did we talk about last week? You know, what did you take away from the lectures last week? And the purpose of this, right? Why I ask this is I want to make sure that you're learning what I think I'm teaching. And if there's a mismatch here, then I want to make sure that we're on the same page. Okay? So that's why I ask the question that I ask. So what did you guys take away from the lectures last week?
Um, Good morning. You can hear me?
Good morning, Jade. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'm looking at the causation notes, which I believe is last week's, and it has a similar but for test to criminal law, but it's not applied the same way. You basically have to look and see if the defendant's actions were basically the cause of the injury, and if it was, you establish basically duty of care and so forth.
Yeah.
But
Yep, exactly. Okay, great. So have a question sent to me privately to please go over successive causes. So just a reminder, right? There are a few situations where the but-for analysis breaks down, right? We can't apply the but-for analysis. And in these situations, the court does things a little bit differently, okay? Because applying the strict but-for would lead to an unjust result in the court's eyes. One of these is the successive cause, okay? And a successive cause is where, let me grab the book because I want to make sure I give you the correct language. Yeah, the successive cause, pulling up my lecture notes to make sure I do this right. So the successive cause is where, okay, I found it. I see what I need to tell you. The successive cause is where there's this indisputable causation, right? You have negligence that causes the harm, okay? But there is some later action that causes additional or indistinguishable injuries, okay? So what that means is, so one of the examples is where you experience a workplace injury that, say, damages your hands, and then later you develop arthritis in your hands. The employer whose workplace you were injured at is not going to be liable for damages that are attributable to the arthritis. Okay, so you're welcome to answer privately. Just check in and make sure that you understand this now. So, okay, great. Another private message to go over economic loss and psychiatric injury. Okay. This is a big topic. I think that I can give you sort of, in the time that we have, I can give you sort of this a very 30,000 foot look. If you're still confused, come to office hours, okay, to the person who asked this question. Economic loss is loss that is not connected to a physical injury, okay? And in the Caribbean, it is relatively rare. The only real exception to that rule that allows for economic loss is the negligent advice rule. And it is only allowed where there is a special relationship for advice. Okay, so there has to be some sort of non-fiduciary relationship where the advice is being given in a professional capacity. And then with psychiatric injury, right, again, these are psychiatric injuries without physical injury, right? It's sort of, it's uncontroversial that if you are injured physically, you can also recover for psychiatric injury that is connected to that physical injury. And that's the primary victim doctrine of psychiatric injury. The secondary victim doctrine is recovering for psychiatric injury caused by physical injury to someone else. And that requires some sort of, again, a special relationship, and what that relationship looks like is very fact driven, and the court will inquire into it. Okay, so does that help? If you need more, come to office hours and we'll talk more in office hours. Okay, all right, so now we're going to move on to today's activity. And again, if you recall, right, the tutorial activities look back 2 weeks, so we're going to be talking about breach this week. And what I would like to do specifically is, this is an activity that in the pedagogy scholarship is referred to as a think, pair, share. And if you had come into the classroom cold, you would now have a few minutes to sort of think about this prompt that I'm about to put in the chat for you. To write a fact pattern that, if true, would give rise to an inference of res ipsa loquitur. This fact pattern should not match any case that you have read, either in this course or elsewhere. The point of this exercise is to think about what sorts of events are impossible in the absence of negligence. So I asked you guys to prepare this ahead of time, so you've already done the think part. Now we're going to do the pair part, where you will go into a breakout room with at most 2 other people, but preferably 1, and you will explain the fact patterns that you came up with to one another. Okay, you'll have about 10 minutes in the breakout rooms, and then we'll reconvene and you will present someone else's fact pattern. So for example, right, if Chelsea and Jade wind up in a breakout room together, they'll go in, Chelsea will explain her fact pattern to Jade and vice versa. And then when we reconvene, Jade will present Chelsea's fact pattern to the class and vice versa. Okay. And the purpose of this exercise, and I want to explain this to you, the purpose of this exercise, of this piece of this exercise, is to do 2 things. One is to give you some practice in taking someone else's story and explaining it in your own words. Okay. And the second thing is to lower the stakes a little. So there may be some of you, and I'm not saying that this is true of anybody in particular, but there may be some of you who are nervous about presenting something that you've created to the class as a whole and to me. But in this way, you are being asked to present someone else's ideas, and your idea, someone else, a third party, is responsible for presenting your ideas. And so that kind of lowers the stakes if you're feeling a little nervous. So what questions do you have about how this activity is going to work? Any questions? Last chance for questions. Going once, going twice. Okay, so let me set up the breakout rooms for you guys. And they are open, and please step into them, and we'll give you guys, like I said, about 10 minutes, and then we'll reconvene. Akeem, is everything okay? Gemma, is everything okay? Seem to be here twice.
That store like the luggage under the plane, they didn't hook it back like properly. Like
Mhm.
so while they took flight, like a suitcase fell out the sky and knocked someone on land unconscious and killed them. So in this case, that would apply because if not for their negligence and failing to shut back the part of the airplane properly, then that person could still have their life.
Okay. So I think that I think that this is really a helpful place to start, right? Because remember that res ipsa, right, applies when the plaintiff is unable to identify the negligent act. Okay. But in this story, I feel like I can identify the negligent act, right? It's the failure to secure the baggage compartment on the airplane, and that's the cause of the negligence, and that's the cause of the harm, and certainly it's clearly a breach of the duty of care, but we know what it is. So I think that this is absolutely negligence, but I'm not convinced that it's that res ipsa applies because we know what the negligent act was. Okay. So, but I really appreciate Kelsey. Thank you for being brave enough to go first. That's always really difficult, so I appreciate that. And thank you, Teresa, for the effort of writing the fact pattern. So thank you for that. Who would like to go next?
Well, so since Kelsey did mine, so I'll just do her own.
Okay, go ahead.
Her fact pattern was um she's in the yard with her family and the neighbor's dog comes along. There's somebody with an abnormal mind there, and the dog attacks the person, and the person attacks back the dog, hurting it physically. Maybe even the dog dies, and then the neighbors comes along, wants to sue the family for the death of the dog.
Wow. So that was a twist I wasn't expecting. I thought I thought this was going towards being a dog bite case, but in fact it's man bites dog. Very creative, right? I really appreciate that. So
So he had an abnormality of mind.
yes,
That
yes,
is not reasonably foreseeable.
yeah. So again, right, I think that this is a situation where there may be issues with proving up negligence related to, as you point out, the reasonable foreseeability, possibly related to the eggshell skull plaintiff that we're going to talk about tomorrow. Uh, but the negligence, I guess I'm not sure where the family or the person of, I'm sorry, unsound, was that the term you used? Unbalanced? Abnormal. It was abnormal mind. Abby normal. Uh, sorry, I didn't mean to just sort of disappear into a reverie there for a second. I'm not sure that I see the negligence on the part of the person with the abnormal mind or the person with or their family, right? That person has the right to be in their yard. If anything, it seems like the negligence comes from the dog's owner, right? In letting the dog sort of wander free. So I think that we can identify the negligent act, and in fact, based on on how you've framed the fact pattern, it seems to me that this would be a situation that's ripe for a counterclaim from the defendant, and that the counterclaim would likely carry the day, while the original claim did not. So, but thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to sort of think through this with you. So I think that's a really interesting fact pattern you've come up with. Who would like to go next? Who would like to go next?
Hi, good afternoon, sir.
Okay, go ahead. Hi.
So I had Shamaria's as my partner, and she has that they were building a park in a residential area, and it was fenced off. They had the hazard signs and so forth for the construction area. And in the afternoon, so the area obviously has children. So in the afternoon, after where everybody packed up and left, but apparently there was a hole in the fence, and the child is 4 years old. So somehow they got through the hole and got to the sand pit of the construction area and ate some of the sand. And as a result, they had tapeworms and got sick. So the family wants to sue the construction company or whoever for the sickness of the child.
Well, So this is interesting because the argument for the plaintiff is going to be that, there's no way for the child to have access to the construction site without someone's negligence, right? There had to be some failure on the part of the contractor to secure the site adequately, right? So this is sort of similar to the facts that lead up to the Hughes case, right? This is the case where the child lowers the oil lamp into the sewer and causes the explosion. So go ahead, Jade. Did you just want to say something?
No, that was background noise.
Okay. So it seems to me that there may be I think this is closer to res ipsa than the others that we've heard today, but I think we still have an issue where it may be possible to identify the negligent act, in that, we can sort of spot the hole in the fence and we know what's going on. But absent that, if we just sort of, if there's multiple places where access could have occurred, but they're all negligent, then maybe res ipsa applies. I think this would be one of the situations where it's sort of judge's choice, right? The judge can either use res ipsa to find for the plaintiff, or they can find that the plaintiff simply proved that the negligent act occurred. And I think that's a situation where the judge's discretion is sort of going to shape how the case moves forward. Okay.
Okay.
So who would like to go next? But thank you, Shamaria. I think that was a really great fact pattern. And guys, I hope you guys understand that even when I say, hey, you haven't quite hit the mark here, like, this is a a a moment where you are being judged based on the effort you put in, not on the product that you produce. So I mean it when I say I appreciate the creativity that's going into these things, and it really, and I appreciate the work. So even when I'm going, this isn't quite it, I still recognize and appreciate what you have done. So thank you, Shamaria, thank you, Jade. Who would like to go next?
Sir.
Sir.
Okay, I had two jump in. Shamaria, you go first, and then we'll hear from Alana.
Okay, so I had Jade's fact pattern. So in her scenario, the plaintiff is an industrial painter and the defendant is a tenant on the fifth floor of an apartment building.
Mhm.
So the plaintiff, which is the industrial painter, was painting the ground floor of the apartment complex. The defendant was having the fifth floor, which their apartment is on, being renovated. So the renovation consisted of the construction of a high-end patio, and the defendant had
I'm sorry. The construction of a what?
a grand piano in their apartment.
Okay, sorry. Stupid
A
American
high-end patio.
ears. So go ahead.
Great. So the defendant had a grand piano. So they didn't want the piano to be damaged in the midst of the construction. So they moved their grand piano onto the patio. So I think the brakes on the piano was not fully functional, and therefore the piano slid off of the patio and then hit the plaintiff on the ground floor, who was painting for the apartment complex.
Okay, so why do you think that res ipsa applies?
So that was I think the res ipsa applies because if the defendant had properly placed the piano, because obviously they would have to know that the piano doesn't have functional brakes because it's their piano. So if they have placed it in a place which it wouldn't have caused any harm to anyone, being that they put it on the patio, which is under construction, and since it has no brakes, the likelihood of it falling off and injuring someone would be highly probable.
Yeah. Well, think about it. Think about this from the plaintiff's perspective, right? Pianos don't do high dives, right? Very, very simple, very straightforward, right? This is not a thing that pianos do. So when a piano falls out of a building, somebody is negligent in some way, right? I don't know that it's necessary for us to sort of delve into the details of, well, the brakes were defective and it got moved because it was under construction. It's enough to go, the piano fell out of the building. Defendant, explain yourself, right? So does that make sense? I think that this is a very good example of res ipsa, in the sense that if we sort of remove the things that the plaintiff would not be able to know, right? So the plaintiff would not know if the brakes were defective. The plaintiff might not know that the fifth floor apartment was under renovation, right? What the plaintiff knows is, I was, standing next to this building, painting it, and a piano fell on my head. And that seems like it's probably a source, caused by some sort of negligent act of some kind. Jade, I really appreciate this fact pattern. I think that this is a really good example of res ipsa once we sort of look at it through the lens that the plaintiff is going to be looking at it through. So great job. I really appreciate that, Shamaria. Thank you for presenting it to us. Alana Calendar, because we have two Alanas, you get the last presentation of the day. So take it away.
Okay, sir. So I had Akeem,
Mhm.
and so in our scenario, Bob and Rachel were walking on the pavement or on the sidewalk on the way to a movie theater. As they were about to cross the street, John, who was driving over the speed limit at 10 kilometers per hour, he notices Bob and Rachel crossing and attempts to brake. However, there was an oil spill in the road, and John's car, ends up skidding and heading towards Bob and Rachel. Bob, who was on the pavement, got hit by the car and attempts to flee. As he attempts to flee, however, Rachel was hit by a fallen tree that was hit by the car.
Mhm.
So, right, so that was the fact.
So why do you think it was that res ipsa applies?
I think the res ipsa applies because he was negligent in speeding. You're not supposed to go above the speed limit, and because you never know what will happen. Oil could come up, anything could happen, and he skids in the oil and hits a tree and hits Bob and
So
Rachel does.
So again, right, if we look at this through the plaintiff's lens, right, I think this is a good example, but if we look at this through the plaintiff's lens, the plaintiff doesn't have, Bob doesn't have to know that, that John was speeding. Why? Because cars don't jump the curb and hit people on the pavement, if they are being, operated with due care. So Bob doesn't have to prove the specific act that John was negligent via speeding. Bob proves I was standing on the sidewalk and this car came up out of nowhere and hit me. And from that, we can infer that the car was negligently operated. And then the burden shifts to John to prove, well, actually there was an oil slick and I did everything that I could reasonably do to avoid this, and I hit Bob anyway.
Okay, I understand.
So, okay. So again, really great work from everyone. I really appreciate this, the effort that is on display here. So I don't want you to think that me sort of pushing back on this was critical in any way. The goal here was for you guys to get a better understanding of how the doctrine of res ipsa works. What questions do you have about res ipsa before we knock off for the day?
So,
Yes, go ahead,
okay.
Shamaria.
My question is that in terms of determining the res ipsa of a situation, is the case that you can't directly see the negligence. It has to be something that you have to stop and think who exactly is negligent here.
So the answer is that in a traditional negligence analysis, the plaintiff has to be able to identify the negligent act and prove that it happened. Okay, so you have to be able, in a car wreck case, you have to be able to prove that the defendant was speeding. You have, in a products liability case, you have to prove that the label was deficient in some way, right? There has to be some sort of negligent act proven. Res ipsa says that this accident, right, what the plaintiff knows happened, can only have happened if someone was negligent. So the fact that I can't identify what negligent act happened doesn't mean that there wasn't negligence. So does that answer your question, Shamaria?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. What other questions are there before we wrap up? Nothing else? Okay,
Sir,
go ahead, Gemma.
can I give mine to get some feedback?
Tell you what, email it to me, but you absolutely can.
Okay, will do.
Yeah.
Will do.
All right. Anything else before we wrap it up? Okay. So, if you have not checked your email today, please do so. I sent you a note this morning that talks about what you need to do to prepare for tomorrow's lecture. I hope that this activity has helped you sort of understand this doctrine a little bit better. And I will see you guys tomorrow. So take care and bye.